He didn't stop because he was a hero. He stopped because he heard a woman screaming in the dark, and he couldn't make himself drive away. What Logan Vance pulled from that wreck wasn't just a stranger. It was a woman being hunted, and the men hunting her were already on their way. One frozen night on a mountain highway would cost him his savings, his peace of mind, and nearly everything he'd built to protect his two little girls. But sometimes the thing that breaks your life open is the same thing that finally makes it whole. If this kind of story stays with you, the kind with real stakes, real people, and endings you didn't see coming, then hit that subscribe button right now and ring the bell so you never miss what comes next. Every week we bring you stories that remind you what people are truly capable of when everything is on the line. Drop a like if you're already hooked, and tell us in the comments what city and country you're watching from. I read every single one, and it means more than you know to see how far these stories have traveled. Now settle in, this one runs deep. The storm had been building since mid-afternoon. Logan Vance had watched it come in the way he watched most things, quietly, without comment, tracking the details that mattered. The way the temperature dropped faster than the forecast had predicted. The way the wind shifted direction twice in under an hour. The way the sky to the northwest had turned the particular shade of gray that people who'd grown up in the Rockies recognized instinctively, the kind that didn't negotiate. He should have left town earlier. He knew that. But Haley's after-school program had run long because of the winter showcase, and he'd sat in a folding chair in the gymnasium watching his 9-year-old play a recorder with the focused intensity of someone defusing a bomb, and he hadn't been able to bring himself to rush her out the door before she took her bow. Some things, Logan had decided long ago, you didn't rush. Brooke was asleep in the back seat before they even reached the edge of Pine Hollow proper. She was 6, and 6-year-olds could sleep through anything. Car rides, loud restaurants, the particular kind of exhausted silence that fathers who raised children alone carried around like a second coat. Haley was in the passenger seat, still humming the piece she'd performed, her breath fogging against the cold window. "You think I messed up the last part?" she asked. "No." "You didn't even look up." "I was looking, I heard it. You didn't mess it up." She considered this. Haley was the kind of kid who processed compliments carefully, turned them over like stones to check what was underneath. She'd gotten that from him, which he wasn't entirely proud of. "Mrs. Delgado said the ending was supposed to be softer," she said. "Mrs. Delgado plays piano. She probably forgets that recorders don't have a volume knob." Haley almost smiled. Almost. The highway opened up ahead of them, and Logan felt the truck shudder as the wind came across the exposed ridge in a solid wall. The heater was working, but the temperature outside had fallen another 8 degrees in the last 20 minutes, and his gas gauge was sitting closer to empty than he liked. He'd meant to fill up in town. That was the other thing he should have done. The road curved around the base of the mountain and descended toward the valley floor, where Pine Hollow sat sheltered between two ridges. In summer, it was the kind of drive that real estate agents photographed for listings. In February, on a night like this, it was something else entirely. He had the headlights on high, and they cut maybe 40 feet into the swirling white before the snow swallowed them. Haley had gone quiet. Even at 9, she understood when her father needed to concentrate. Logan kept both hands on the wheel, reading the road through the resistance in the steering rather than what he could see of it, feeling for the edge of the pavement under the accumulating snow. He'd driven worse. He'd navigated terrain that made this look like a parking lot. But he hadn't done it with his daughters in the car, and that changed the math on every decision. He was coming around the long left curve above the valley when the headlights caught something at the edge of the road. At first, his brain processed it as a drift. The snow piling against something at the bottom of the ditch, a shape that didn't quite belong. Then the shape resolved into metal. Black metal crumpled against the slope of the embankment, one rear wheel still pointing toward the sky at an angle that told him everything about the speed and direction of impact. A car. A good one, from what he could see. Down in the ditch, nose buried in the hillside, driver's side badly compressed. Logan braked, slow and steady, feeling the truck start to slide before the tires caught again. He steered to the shoulder and got the hazards on before the truck had fully stopped. "Dad," Haley's voice was careful, controlled, the way he'd taught her. "Stay in the truck," Logan said. "Both of you. Doors locked. I mean it." "Is someone—" "Doors locked, Haley. Don't open them for anyone but me." He was out of the cab before she answered. The cold hit him like something physical, a weight rather than just a temperature. He had a jacket, but it wasn't the jacket he would have chosen for this. His boots were good. He'd never stopped buying good boots. It was the one thing from his old life he hadn't been able to let go. And they found purchase on the icy shoulder as he moved to the edge of the embankment and looked down. The sedan was a recent model. Black, expensive, the kind of car that had no business on this road in this weather. It had gone off the outside of the curve, which meant it had come from the direction of the pass, from higher elevation, in conditions that had been even worse up there. The front end had absorbed most of the impact. The roof on the driver's side had crumpled slightly inward from where the car had rolled or slid against the embankment. Then he heard her, not screaming, not the sustained shrieking that panic produced. It was worse than that. It was the sound of someone who had already used up their screaming and was down to something raw. A voice calling out from inside the wreck, breaking at the edges, the sound of someone who wasn't sure anymore if anyone was coming. "Hey!" Logan was already moving down the embankment, feet angled sideways to keep from going over. "Hey, I hear you. I'm coming to you right now." The voice inside the car went sharp with sudden desperate hope. "Please, please, I can't. The door won't." "I know. Don't move. Don't try to force anything." He reached the driver's side window and crouched to look in. She was young. Younger than him, he thought, though it was hard to judge in the dark with the snow and the shock. Dark hair matted against her face, both hands pressed against the dashboard as if she could push it back by force of will. Her left leg was pinned. Not deeply, he could see that, but pinned enough. The dashboard had buckled inward from the impact and caught her just below the knee. Her eyes found his through the cracked glass, and he saw something he recognized. Not just fear, not just pain. Something watchful underneath all of it. A second layer of awareness that didn't belong to someone who'd simply lost control of their car on an icy road. "Are you alone?" he asked. "Yes." Too fast. He filed it away and kept moving. "What's your name?" "Cameron." She swallowed. "Cameron Ellison?" "Logan. Logan, I'm going to get you out. Are you feeling anything in your leg below where it's pinned?" "I don't know. I think so. It hurts." "Hurting is good. Hurting means circulation." He was already assessing the door, buckled at the hinge, not going anywhere. The window was cracked but largely intact. "I need you to turn your face away and keep your eyes closed. I'm going to break the glass." "Okay." She turned her head. He could see her jaw clenching. He had his tire iron from the truck bed. He'd grabbed it automatically, the part of his brain that ran on old training taking over without being asked. He covered as much of the window with his jacket sleeve as he could manage and struck the lower corner hard. The glass cratered inward in the right way, away from her face, and he cleared the opening with 3 careful sweeps before reaching through to unlock the door from the inside. The door resisted. He put his shoulder against it and felt the hinges groan under the pressure, and then it came open with a sound like something tearing. Cold air poured into the car. Cameron flinched. "Almost," Logan said. He got down on his knees in the snow and looked at where her leg was caught. The dashboard had bent inward, the edge of the panel pressing against her shin. Not deep, not crushing, but solid enough that pulling her straight back wasn't going to work. He went back to the truck. "Dad," Haley's voice through the window, doing a remarkable job of keeping the fear out of it. "There's a woman in that car. I'm getting her out. You and Brooke stay exactly where you are." He dug behind the seat and came out with the small hydraulic jack he kept for emergencies. "Doors stay locked." "Is she hurt bad?" "She'll be okay." He didn't know that yet, but he said it like he did, because Haley needed to hear something solid. Back at the wreck, he worked the jack into the space between the seat frame and the compressed dashboard, angling for maximum leverage. Cameron watched him with the focused attention of someone trying to keep themselves present through sheer concentration. "This is going to make noise," he told her. "And it might feel like the car is shifting. It won't go anywhere. The back end is against the slope." "Okay." Her voice was steadier than it had been. He noticed that. He cranked the jack. The dashboard groaned, metal protesting the change in pressure, a low mechanical complaint that cut through the noise of the wind. He watched the gap. An inch, another inch. He stopped. "Can you slide your leg toward me?" "Slow." She moved. He saw her face tighten against the pain of it, but she moved without making a sound, and her leg came free. Logan caught her under the arms as she came out of the car, taking her weight before she could put it on the injured leg. She was taller than he'd thought, or maybe it was just the shock of her suddenly being upright and leaning against him. She smelled like perfume and blood and the particular mineral cold of the mountain air. "Can you walk?" "I think so, maybe." She tried to put weight on the leg and her breath caught. "Maybe not." He adjusted his grip and took more of her weight. They went up the embankment together, slowly, Logan picking each step before he committed to it. Cameron's fingers were wrapped around his arm with the kind of grip that left bruises. He got the truck door open and helped her into the back seat, where Brooke stirred briefly, regarded the stranger with the philosophical calm of a half-asleep 6-year-old, and went back to sleep against the opposite window. Logan climbed in and got the heat directed toward the back. Haley had turned completely around in her seat and was staring at Cameron with 9-year-old directness. "You're bleeding on your forehead," Haley said. "I know," Cameron said. "Thank you." "It's not that bad. I've seen worse." Logan met Cameron's eyes in the rearview mirror. Something in her face softened very slightly, surprised by his daughter the way most people were surprised by Haley. He pulled the truck back onto the highway, moving carefully, and started down toward Pine Hollow. For a few minutes, nobody spoke. The heater ran. The wipers worked against the snow. Then Logan noticed it. Cameron was not looking at Haley. She was not looking at the road ahead or at her own reflection in the glass. She was turned slightly in her seat, watching the highway behind them through the rear window, watching it the way someone watches a space they expect to see something come through. "Is there someone else up there?" Logan asked. He kept his voice neutral, the way he'd learned to ask questions when the answer mattered. She hesitated, just half a second too long. "No," she said. I'm still shaky." "The accident." He nodded. He didn't believe her. He had spent years learning to read the difference between someone who was frightened by what had just happened and someone who was frightened by what might happen next. The first kind looked inward. The second kind kept their eyes on the exits. Cameron Ellison was watching the exits. Pine Hollow was 12 minutes away. The gas gauge trembled just above empty. His daughters were in the car, the roads were closed behind them, and the woman he'd just pulled from a wreck was carrying something she hadn't told him about yet. Logan Vance did what he'd always done when a mission changed shape on him. He drove forward and started thinking. Pine Hollow at night in February looked like a town that had given up on the idea of people. The main street ran 4 blocks, and most of the storefronts had their lights off by 8. The gas station on the corner still had its sign lit, orange and buzzing against the dark, and Logan pulled in with the needle resting firmly on empty and what he estimated was about 1.5 miles of range left in the tank. He left the engine running for the heat and got out to pump. The wind had dropped since they'd come off the mountain, but the temperature hadn't, and his breath came out in hard white bursts. Through the glass, he could see Haley had turned around again and was talking to Cameron. He couldn't hear what they were saying. Cameron was nodding at something, and her expression had shifted from the wary, controlled look she'd worn on the drive down to something less defended. Something that happened to people when 9-year-olds talked to them without any agenda. He topped off the tank, replaced the cap, and sat back in the driver's seat. "She said her name is Cameron, and she has an apartment in Denver," Haley reported, with the tone of someone delivering an official briefing. "She says she likes French food, but thinks most French restaurants in Colorado are pretending." "That's accurate," Cameron said. Her voice was steadier now. The warmth of the truck had helped. "I didn't mean to overshare with your daughter." "She has a way of pulling information out of people," Logan said. "Gets it from her mother." He hadn't meant to say that last part. It came out before he decided to say it, which was the kind of thing that happened when you were tired and running on adrenaline. He felt Haley go slightly still beside him, the way she always did when their mother came up unexpectedly, like a small animal deciding whether to move or stay still. "The highway's going to be closed until morning at the earliest," Logan said, moving on. "There's one motel in Pine Hollow, the Ridgeline. It's not much, but it's clean." "That sounds fine," Cameron said quickly. "That's perfect. If you could just drop me, it'll be closed." He glanced in the mirror. "Roy shuts the front desk at 9. You could call him, but he's 72 and his hearing isn't great, and I'd rather not spend 20 minutes with you standing outside in this cold, waiting to find out." She opened her mouth and closed it again. "You can take the guest room," he said. "It's nothing special, but it's got a working heater and a real bed." He paused. Haley would tell you it smells like the cedar chest we put in the closet last summer, which she thinks is a problem. I think it's fine. It's a lot, Haley said flatly. One night, he said. Cameron looked at him in the mirror for a moment. He could see her calculating something. Not whether to trust him exactly, but how much. What she could afford to accept. There was a precision to it that didn't belong to someone who was simply deciding whether a stranger's guest room was safe. It was the calculation of someone who had learned the hard way that accepting help always cost something. Thank you, she said finally. One night. His house was 6 blocks from the gas station, a 2-story place with a porch that needed repainting and a yard that needed everything. He'd bought it 3 years ago because the price was right, and the school was walking distance, and it had a basement he could use as a shop. He'd never gotten around to the porch, but the basement was in good order, and the school had turned out to be excellent. Brooke woke up when the truck stopped and accepted the presence of a stranger in the back seat with complete serenity. She was that kind of child. Where Haley observed and analyzed, Brooke simply absorbed. She took Cameron's hand without being asked when they walked up the icy porch steps and guided her through the front door like she was showing someone around a place she was personally proud of. That's the couch where Dad falls asleep watching the game, Brooke announced. He says he's resting his eyes, but he's asleep, and that's the kitchen. We made a rule that whoever cooks doesn't have to clean up, but nobody actually follows it. We follow it, Haley said from behind them. You don't follow it. I follow it more than you. Logan got Cameron settled at the kitchen table with a bag of frozen peas on her shin and a look at the cut on her forehead, which was minor, a half-inch scrape that had bled dramatically and then stopped, the way head wounds did. He cleaned it with the kit he kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator and put a thin strip bandage across it, while she sat very still and looked at a point somewhere over his shoulder. Does anything else hurt? He asked. Neck? Back? I'm sore. Everything's sore. I don't think anything's broken. The leg I'm not certain about. If it's not better in the morning, we should get it looked at. I'll be fine. He leaned back and looked at her directly. You keep saying that. She met his eyes. Something moved through her expression and then was controlled. It's a habit. He went and put the girls to bed, which took longer than it should have because Brooke wanted to know if Cameron was going to be there in the morning, and Haley had opinions about the guest room cedar situation that she wanted on record. And by the time he came back downstairs, Cameron had moved from the kitchen table to the window beside the front door. She was standing slightly to the side of it, looking out at the street, not through the middle of the glass, but from the edge, where she could see without being visible from outside. Logan stopped in the doorway and watched her for a moment. She hadn't heard him come down. She was focused on the street, her weight shifted forward very slightly onto her toes, her arms crossed at her chest in a way that looked like self-comfort, but could also have been something else. The porch light lit a narrow strip of the yard and the street beyond, and she was tracking the edges of that light. Expecting someone? He asked. She spun around faster than he expected for someone with a bruised shin, and he saw the fear in her face before she got it covered. It was only there for a second, but a second was enough. I was just... She stopped, looked at him, seemed to make a decision. No, sorry. Old habit. He went to the kitchen, poured 2 inches of whiskey into a glass, and set it on the table. Then he sat down across from where she'd been sitting and waited. After a moment, she came back from the window and sat down. She looked at the whiskey glass, but didn't touch it. You were watching the street the same way you were watching the highway on the drive down, Logan said. He kept his voice even, conversational. Not the way someone watches because they're nervous after an accident. The way someone watches when they're looking for something specific. Cameron was quiet. I'm not asking because I want your business, he said. I'm asking because my daughters are asleep upstairs. And if someone is going to show up at my door at 2 a.m, I'd rather know about it now. She looked at her hands on the table. Her nails were done, or had been done recently, the kind of manicure that cost real money, and 2 of them were broken from the accident. She was looking at them like they belonged to someone else. My car didn't slide off the road, she said. He waited. I was going too fast because I was trying to put distance between me and a car that had been behind me since Glenwood Canyon. She looked up. They'd been following me for about 40 miles. I saw them in Vail and I thought maybe I was being paranoid, and then I saw them again after Frisco and I knew I wasn't. She paused. I took the mountain road instead of staying on the interstate because I thought I could lose them in the conditions. I almost did, but I overcorrected on the curve. Who was following you? She picked up the whiskey glass, looked at it, set it back down without drinking. That's the part that's complicated. I've got time, she told him. Not all of it, not right away. It came out in pieces, the way difficult things usually did. The important parts surfaced first, and the context filled in around them. Her name was Cameron Ellison. She was 30 years old, which was younger than he'd thought. She'd founded her restaurant company, Ellison Hospitality Group, at 24 with a concept that turned out to be right for the moment. Fast casual dining that didn't treat its customers like they should be embarrassed by wanting something decent for $12. She'd grown it fast. Maybe too fast. By the time she was 27, she had 23 locations across 5 states and a management structure that was outrunning her ability to fund it. I needed capital, she said. I knew the company was good, the margins were good, the concept was proven. I just needed a bridge to get through the expansion phase. She turned the glass slowly on the table. Someone introduced me to a group of private investors. They looked legitimate. They had a track record, references, all of it. The terms seemed aggressive, but not insane. I'd seen worse from banks. She stopped. I should have had my lawyer look at it more carefully. I knew I should. I was in a hurry, and I convinced myself I understood what I was signing. How much? $2.8 million, which was what I needed. She exhaled. And for about 8 months, everything was fine. The expansion went the way I'd planned. The new locations started hitting their numbers, and I started thinking about buyout timelines. She shook her head slowly. And then their guy called me into a meeting and explained that due to clauses I had apparently agreed to, the interest had been compounding on a schedule that wasn't what I thought it was, and I now owed them substantially more than the original principal. How much more? They said $2.9 million, on top of what I'd already paid back. Logan was quiet for a moment. He'd dealt with enough people in his life, enough situations, to know that the specific amounts and mechanisms mattered less than the structure. What she was describing had a structure he recognized. It wasn't a financial arrangement. It was a trap designed to look like one. And when you tried to negotiate? Their leader came himself for that meeting. His name is Harlan Rourke. Something moved across her face when she said the name, a physical reaction she didn't fully suppress. He made it very clear that the money was not actually the point. He owns a portfolio of businesses, and what he wants is to add Ellison Hospitality to it. The debt is the mechanism. As long as I owe them, he controls the company. And he's made it clear that the terms will keep adjusting until I either hand over control or... She stopped. Or what? She looked at him directly. He didn't say it explicitly. He's careful about that. But there were 2 men in the room who were not accountants, and Harlan Rourke looked at me at the end of that meeting and said, I hope you'll make the right decision for everyone involved. She was quiet for a moment. I've heard that kind of sentence before. I knew what it meant. Logan sat back in his chair. Outside, the wind had picked up again, pressing at the windows. The house made the small groaning sounds that old houses made in cold weather, the framework adjusting to the temperature. Somewhere upstairs, one of his daughters had gotten up to use the bathroom. He heard the footsteps, light and quick, and then the soft close of a door. When did you decide to run? He asked. 3 days ago. I've been documenting everything. Every meeting, every contract, every email I can access. I have copies. I was taking them somewhere safe when... She gestured vaguely in the direction of the mountain. When tonight happened. Where were you going? A friend in Steamboat Springs. A lawyer. Someone Rourke doesn't know about. Logan nodded slowly. He pulled the whiskey glass the few inches across the table that it needed to reach him and took a drink. It was the cheap bottle, not that he had an expensive one. It tasted like it was doing its job. The men who are following you, he said. They don't know you ended up in Pine Hollow? I don't think so. I don't know. The car is in a ditch on the side of a mountain in a whiteout, so... She showed a brief, humorless version of a smile. Maybe they assume I didn't make it. Maybe. He didn't find that particularly comforting. People who sent other people to follow women through blizzards tended to be thorough. Get some sleep. The guest room is at the top of the stairs, second door. There's an extra blanket in the closet. Don't let the cedar smell stop you from using it. She looked at him. You believe me? It wasn't quite a question. I believe enough of it, he said. The rest I'll figure out. She nodded once, and there was something in it. Not relief exactly, more like the cautious release of a tension she'd been holding for so long she'd stopped noticing it. She pushed back from the table and stood, testing her weight on the bad leg with the careful attention of someone taking inventory. Logan. She said his name like she was making sure she had it right. Why did you stop? On the highway. You had your daughters in the car. It was dangerous. You had no reason to. You were asking for help, he said simply. Go get some sleep. She went upstairs. He sat at the kitchen table for another 20 minutes, turning over what she'd told him, separating the things he knew from the things he was assuming. It was an old habit, the kind that had kept him alive in places where the consequences of confusing the two were immediate and permanent. He didn't think she was lying about the important parts. Frightened people sometimes simplified, sometimes left out the pieces that made them look bad, sometimes bent the shape of events to make their own choices look more reasonable than they'd been. Cameron had done some of that. He could see the edges of it, the places where the story jumped slightly. But the core of it held together, and more than that, her body had told him things her words hadn't. The way she'd watched the window, the way she'd said Harlan Rourke's name. That part hadn't been performance. He went to bed around midnight and slept lightly, the way he always did, the way the Navy had trained into him and the years of single parenthood had reinforced. He heard the house settle and the wind work at the eaves, and somewhere around 3 a.m, Brooke get up and pad down the hall to his room and push the door open the way she did when the weather scared her. Come on, he said, before she had to ask, and she climbed up and curled against his back and was asleep in under a minute. He lay awake a little longer, looking at the ceiling. In the morning, he was up at 6:15. He came downstairs in yesterday's clothes and started coffee and was standing at the stove with a pan of eggs when he heard movement in the front room. Cameron was awake, sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up and a notepad in her lap. She had apparently found a pen somewhere. She was writing quickly, small, tight handwriting that covered the page in dense lines. She was still in the clothes she'd worn the night before, and there were shadows under her eyes that said she hadn't slept much. She looked up when he came in. The cut on her forehead had settled into a clean, dark line under the bandage strip. I didn't want to go through your cabinets for coffee, she said. I would have made some, but I wasn't sure. 15 minutes, he said. You want eggs? You don't have to. I'm making them anyway. 2 daughters. You'd be surprised how much food I have to produce in the morning. She looked at the notepad in her lap, then back at him. I was writing down everything I remembered, dates, conversations, specific things that were said. My lawyer will need it. Good. He went back to the kitchen. How's the leg? It'll be okay. Can you put weight on it? More than last night. A pause. Logan? The highway. Is it still closed? I checked my phone when I got up. They're saying mid-morning before they reopen it. She was quiet for a moment. Okay. Haley came downstairs first, registered Cameron's presence on the couch with a nod that managed to convey both relief and casual acceptance, and went to the kitchen to pour herself cereal. Brooke came down 4 minutes later and immediately went to sit next to Cameron on the couch and look at the notepad. What are those? Brooke asked. Notes, Cameron said. For work. Do you work a lot? I used to. It's complicated right now. Brooke considered this with the philosophical seriousness she brought to most things. My dad works a lot too, but he says the right kind of work is the kind you'd do even if nobody paid you. She paused. I don't know what work I'd do even if nobody paid me. Maybe painting, but probably not. Cameron looked at the child beside her with the expression Logan had seen on people's faces the first time one of his daughters really talked to them. A kind of recalibration. I used to love what I did, Cameron said, and there was something raw and unguarded in it that she probably hadn't intended. I used to wake up thinking about it. What happened? Cameron glanced toward the kitchen, where Logan was managing a pan of eggs and not visibly listening. Someone made it very hard. That's not fair, Brooke said plainly. No, Cameron agreed. It's not. They ate breakfast at the kitchen table, all 4 of them, which was something Logan hadn't done with anyone outside his immediate family in longer than he could easily calculate. Cameron ate carefully, like someone who wasn't sure she'd earned it. Haley ate fast, the way she always did, like food was something to be processed efficiently. Brooke ate slowly and narrated, explaining to Cameron the specific complaints she had about each item in her lunchbox at school, which were detailed and specific and mostly unreasonable. It should have been awkward. It wasn't quite. It was something else, an arrangement that hadn't been designed and therefore had no expectations attached to it, no performance required. Logan noticed that Cameron was more at ease at the table than she'd been the night before, and he thought it was probably the girls. Children had a way of making pretense too exhausting to sustain. He was doing the dishes when his phone buzzed on the counter. A local number, Pine Hollow prefix, but not one he recognized. He dried his hands and picked up. Vance. Mr. Vance. The voice was male, even, with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd learned to deliver menace without raising their volume. My name is Marcus. We understand you assisted a woman on Highway 23 last night. We'd like to speak with her. Logan turned and looked through the kitchen door into the living room. Cameron was at the table, helping Brooke draw something on the back of an envelope. She hadn't heard. How did you get this number? He asked. You were the emergency contact on the towing report for the vehicle. Standard public record. A brief pause. We just want to make sure she's safe. If you could let us know she's all right and have her give us a call, she'll call you when she's ready, Logan said. Mr. Vance? The voice stayed smooth, but something underneath it shifted. This is a private family matter, and we don't want to cause any trouble for you or your... You should stop there, Logan said quietly. Silence on the line. You should stop before you finish that sentence, he said again, in exactly the same tone. And you should think carefully about what you do next. This is Pine Hollow, which you clearly already know. We don't have much here. But what we do have is people who look out for each other and nobody who scares easy. He waited a moment. She's safe. That's all you need to know. He hung up. He stood at the kitchen counter for a moment with his hand on the phone. Through the doorway, Brooke laughed at something Cameron had drawn, that full-chest laugh she had that was entirely too big for her size. Cameron was smiling, and it was a real one, or close enough that only someone who'd been watching for the edges of her real ones would have been able to tell the difference. Logan turned back to the dishes. They knew where she was. They knew he'd helped her. They had his number, and they'd used the word family in a sentence, which wasn't an accident. None of it was an accident. These were people who said exactly what they meant, and left you to do the work of understanding the implication. He understood the implication. The eggs were long since done. The coffee was down to its last half-inch, dark and slightly bitter. Outside, the sky was the pale gray of the morning after a storm, the kind that looked clean but had nothing warm in it. Logan rinsed the pan, set it on the drying rack, and started thinking about next moves. He'd done it before, stood in places where the situation had changed and the original plan no longer applied, where the only thing to do was assess what was actually in front of him rather than what he'd expected to find. He'd learned to be fast at it. He'd also learned that being fast was only useful if you were accurate. Cameron Ellison had walked into his house with a problem that had just become, whether he'd chosen it or not, his problem too. And the man on the other end of that phone had just made the same mistake that certain men always made when they reached the end of a number they'd looked up. They assumed that making the call was enough. They assumed that knowing where someone was and who was protecting them was sufficient pressure to produce the outcome they wanted. Logan picked up his coffee cup, found it empty, and set it back down. He had 2 daughters upstairs finishing getting ready for a school day that was probably going to be canceled. He had a woman at his table who was running from people with real resources and no apparent concern for how far they went. He had a guest room that smelled like cedar and a porch that still needed painting and a mortgage on a house in a town with 1 motel and 1 gas station and absolutely nothing else that made it look like a place where battles got fought and won. None of that mattered. What mattered was that the man on the phone had mentioned his family. And Logan Vance, who had spent years teaching himself to want less and ask for less and live smaller so that nothing could take away the things he needed most, felt something shift in his chest like a door coming off its latch. The quiet was over. The school was closed. Logan found out at 7:42 when the automated message came through, and he told the girls with the particular flatness of a man who understood that a snow day when you had nowhere to put your children was a logistical problem first and anything else second. Haley took it the way she took most things, processing, adapting. Brooke took it as confirmation that the universe occasionally got things right. Cameron was still at the kitchen table when Logan came back in from checking the truck, his boots leaving wet prints across the linoleum. She had her phone out and was staring at it like she was debating whether to pick up a live wire. 11 missed calls, she said without looking up. Since midnight. All the same number? 2 numbers. One is Marcus. She said the name without inflection, the way you said the name of something you'd learned to be careful around. The other is a number I don't recognize, Colorado area code. Don't call either of them back yet. She looked up at that. Yet? I need to think about how this goes. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The man who called me this morning, Marcus, he's not the decision maker. He called to take a reading, see what kind of person he was dealing with. And what kind of person is he dealing with? Logan looked at her steadily. That's what I'm working out. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked back at the phone. Harlan Rourke doesn't send people to take readings for long. When he wants something, he moves. Tell me about him. Not the legal situation. Him. Cameron set the phone face down on the table. She was quiet for a moment, organizing something. He's 61, she said. He built his money in commercial real estate in the 90s, then moved into distressed assets, businesses in trouble that he could acquire for less than value. He's good at it. He finds the moment when someone is desperate enough to take a bad deal, and he presents himself as the solution. She paused. He's patient. He's very patient, and he doesn't get loud about things. He just tightens. What does he actually want with your company? He wants the brand. Ellison Hospitality has name recognition that took me 6 years to build. He has money, but he doesn't have that. He wants to attach himself to something that doesn't look like him. She looked at her hands again, that gesture she had. I think I also embarrassed him a little. When I started pushing back on the debt terms, I brought in my own accountant, and she found 3 clauses that were probably unenforceable. I put that in a letter. Something shifted in her expression, a flash of something that was almost satisfaction before it closed again. He doesn't like being told that the contract doesn't say what he says it says. So this is partly personal. With men like Harlan Rourke, it always gets personal, eventually. Logan nodded slowly. He was turning something over, the shape of a thing he could see from certain angles, but not yet completely. The morning passed strangely. Haley set herself up at the kitchen table with her school tablet and worked through things she didn't need to. She was the kind of kid who created her own assignments when the official ones ran out, which Logan found both admirable and slightly exhausting. Brooke had located a deck of cards and was trying to teach Cameron a game whose rules seemed to change whenever Brooke was losing. That's not how that works, Cameron said, studying her hand. It is how it works, Brooke said serenely. I invented this game. You invented it 3 minutes ago. Inventions can still have rules. Cameron looked at her cards and then at Brooke, and then, briefly, at Logan, who was standing in the kitchen doorway with a coffee cup. He raised his eyebrows slightly. She looked back at her cards and played a 3 of hearts with the solemn expression of someone who had decided to accept an absurd situation on its own terms. He refilled his coffee and thought about Harlan Rourke. At 11:15, his phone buzzed again. A different number this time. Not the Colorado area code Cameron had mentioned, and not the Pine Hollow prefix from that morning. He almost let it go. Then something made him pick up. Mr. Vance. This voice was older, with more weight in it. The measured cadence of someone accustomed to rooms where other people waited to speak. I don't believe we've met. My name is Harlan Rourke. Logan walked into the back hallway and kept his voice level. Mr. Rourke. I appreciate you answering. I know this must seem very strange, a call from a stranger with what sounds like someone else's problem. A pause, the kind that was calculated to feel generous. I want to be straightforward with you. Cameron is someone I've done business with for several years. She is in a difficult situation, some of which is her own making, and some of which is circumstance. I'm concerned about her welfare. She seems fine, Logan said. I'm glad to hear it. Another measured pause. Mr. Vance, I don't know anything about you personally, but I know you have daughters. And I imagine a man raising daughters alone understands that the people around us sometimes need guidance rather than just support. Cameron has made some decisions recently that could cause serious harm to herself and the people who depend on her company. Logan leaned against the wall and looked at the ceiling. That's an interesting way to put it. I'm trying to be honest with you. You're trying to find out what I know and whether I can be moved. And you mentioned my daughters to remind me that I have something to lose. He kept his voice entirely even. That's twice in one morning. I noticed the first time. A longer silence this time. I'd like to meet with you, Rourke said. The smooth texture of the voice had changed very slightly, the way a road changed when the surface material shifted underneath the asphalt. In person, somewhere you're comfortable. I think we can resolve this without anyone being damaged by it. I'll think about it, Logan said. I hope you will. I don't want things to become more complicated than they need to be. Logan hung up. He stood in the hallway for a moment. From the living room, he could hear Brooke arguing cheerfully about card rules in Cameron's lower voice, responding with the patient exasperation of someone who was, despite everything, genuinely engaged in the argument. He went back to the living room doorway. Harlan Rourke just called me. The card game stopped. Cameron looked at him with a stillness that was complete and immediate, every trace of the last half hour gone from her face. What did he say? Logan told her. She listened without interrupting, which he noted. She was the kind of person who listened completely before she responded, which was rarer than it should have been. When he was done, she said, He's in Colorado. He moved here. Or he was already on his way. He's in Colorado, she said again, certain. He called from a local number, or he wouldn't have known your daughter's school was closed today. He knew you were home. Her jaw set. He's been watching the house. Logan absorbed this. He thought about the street outside, the parked cars, the sight lines. He thought about the way Cameron had stood at the window the night before, watching from the edge of the glass. I'm going to meet with him, he said. Logan, not here, somewhere I choose, and you're going to stay here with the girls. I can't let you be... Cameron. He said her name with enough weight to interrupt her without being harsh. I spent 12 years doing things where the first rule was never let someone else pick the ground. I need to pick the ground. He paused. Can you tell me everything about that debt? Every number, every term you remember. I want to know exactly what they claim you owe and exactly what you think the legitimate amount is. She was quiet for a moment, the resistance in her face working against something else, some calculation happening underneath. The original loan was $2.8 million, she said slowly. I paid back just over $1 million in the first 18 months, ahead of schedule. The interest that was disclosed in the original term sheet would have put the remaining balance at roughly 1.4. That's what I offered them. She looked at her hands. They came back with 2.9. They said compound penalties for the attempted early buyout, fees for what they called covenant violations, and interest calculated on a schedule that was buried in the secondary documents I didn't have my attorney review carefully enough. So they're claiming 2.9 on top of what you've already paid. Yes. And your position is the legitimate figure is closer to 1.4. My accountant said 1.3. I was willing to offer 1.5 to end it. Logan was quiet for a moment. He was doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with the numbers she'd just given him, a different kind of calculation entirely. Where is it? He asked. The property you were telling me about, the truck stop. She looked up. What? You said once, yesterday, in the car. You mentioned there was nothing to eat between here and the pass. Then you said something about a truck stop. She blinked. I was just talking. I saw the abandoned sign when we came down the mountain. I wasn't seriously... I know the property, Logan said. I've known it for 3 years. I used to stop there when it was still operating. It closed about 4 years ago, right before I moved here. The lot's big, the building's still standing. County owns it now for back taxes. He paused. Who knows how to run a restaurant? Cameron stared at him. What are you... I'm thinking out loud. Answer the question. I know how to run 23 restaurants, she said, with a flatness that contained something else underneath, a reflex of pride that her situation hadn't fully extinguished. Right. He straightened up from the doorway. I need to make some calls before I meet with Rourke. How long until the highway opens? She looked at her phone. They updated it, noon, maybe 1. Good. He was already moving toward the kitchen. Don't answer your phone, either of the numbers. Logan. Her voice stopped him at the doorway. He turned. She was looking at him with an expression he didn't have a clean name for, something between disbelief and the specific kind of gratitude that embarrassed people. You understand what you're getting into, right? They're not people who respond to being challenged. I know, he said. Then why? Because they called about my daughters twice. He said it simply, without heat, the way he would have stated a fact about the weather. And because I don't like men who use debt as a leash. He picked up his phone from the counter. And because you pulled a notepad out at 6 in the morning to write down everything you remembered, which means you're not done fighting, you're just out of moves. He looked at her. I have a few left. He called Ray Pelletier first. Ray was 64, had been a contractor in Pine Hollow since before Logan moved there, and knew every square foot of property in the county the way other people knew their own addresses. Ray was also the kind of person who answered the phone on the first ring and listened to the whole question before saying anything, which Logan had always appreciated. The Callaway truck stop property, Logan said. What does the county want for it? Ray was quiet for a moment. Assessed at $220, they'd probably take $180, maybe $160 if somebody was serious and showed up with a real proposal. It's been sitting there collecting liability for 4 years. They want it gone. He paused. You thinking about that property? I'm thinking about it. You'd need a partner with hospitality experience. That location needs a restaurant, not a shop. I know that too. Another pause. That woman you pulled out of a car last night, Ray said, in the tone of someone who lived in a town with 400 people and 2 gas stations. Word got around. It usually does. She know anything about restaurants? Something like that, yeah. Ray made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Call me back when you're serious. I've got contacts at 2 banks that do rural commercial development. Interest rates are ugly right now, but not impossible. Logan hung up and made 2 more calls. One to a former teammate who now worked in corporate law in Denver, whose name he wasn't going to mention to anyone in Pine Hollow, and one to a county assessor's office where he'd done some contracting work 2 years back and still knew someone who picked up. By 11:45, he had enough to think with. The diner where he'd arranged to meet Rourke's people was called the Ridgeback. It had 12 tables, a counter with 8 stools, and a pie case that rotated 3 varieties on any given day. It was the kind of place where everyone knew what you drove and where you lived and who your kids were. Logan had chosen it specifically. He left at 12:15. Cameron stood at the kitchen window and watched the truck pull out, her arms crossed, doing the thing she probably didn't know she did, watching from the edge of the glass. The man waiting for him at the corner table was not Harlan Rourke. Logan had expected that. He was younger, mid-40s, in clothes that were too careful for Pine Hollow, the kind of business casual that announced you'd come from somewhere else. A second man sat 2 tables away, facing the room. Logan looked at him once and didn't look again. Marcus, Logan said, sitting down without being invited. Mr. Vance. Marcus had the same voice from the phone, smooth and practiced. Up close, his eyes were doing more work than his face was. I appreciate you coming. You said Rourke wanted to talk. Mr. Rourke wanted to understand your position. He's not here in person, but he's available if this conversation is productive. Logan ordered coffee from the woman who came to the table. Her name was Deb. She'd been working here for 11 years, and she looked at Marcus with the particular lack of warmth that Pine Hollow extended to people who came in like they owned the place. Logan thanked her. Let's skip the part where you explain that Cameron is unreasonable, Logan said. I know what you think of her position. Tell me what the debt number actually is, without the fabricated penalties. Marcus's expression shifted very slightly. The contract terms are what they are. Some of them are. Some of them won't survive scrutiny. You know that. Rourke knows that. Logan picked up his coffee. So let's talk about the real number, because the real number is what any conversation worth having is actually about. A pause. Marcus looked at him with the expression of someone recalibrating. Mr. Rourke's position is that the outstanding obligation, including all accrued terms, is 2.9. His opening position, Logan said, not his real one. Marcus sat back slightly. The man at the other table had gone still in a way that was its own kind of attention. What exactly is your role in this situation, Mr. Vance? Marcus asked. You pulled her out of a car. You gave her a place to sleep. That's admirable. But this is a legal and financial matter that has nothing to do with you. She's under my roof, Logan said. That makes it my concern. That's a generous interpretation. Generous is the wrong word. My daughters are in that house. He set the coffee cup down. He kept his hands relaxed on the table, a thing he'd learned long ago. Relaxed hands told people something. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully so you can relay it correctly. I'm not afraid of Harlan Rourke. I'm not afraid of the kind of pressure you apply from a distance with phone calls and men who sit 2 tables away. I'm not going to be moved off my position by reminders that I have children, because you doing that doesn't make me afraid. It makes me committed." He let that land. "But I'm also not interested in a fight for its own sake. I'm a practical man, so I'm here to make a practical proposal." Marcus waited. Cameron's legitimate obligation, the number that would survive a forensic accounting review and a civil court proceeding, is somewhere between 1.3 and 1.5 million. I know that, and you know that. He watched Marcus's face. "I'm proposing a deal, the full legitimate amount, in a structured payback schedule over 2 years, secured against a commercial property development that Cameron and I are going to build together. She brings the operational expertise. I bring the local relationships and the capital for the property acquisition." He paused. "Rourke gets paid what he's actually owed. Cameron keeps her company. Nobody has to find out how unenforceable the penalty clauses are in front of a judge." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. He had good control of his face. Logan gave him that. But he'd been watching people make decisions under pressure for 12 years, and he could see the calculation happening. "That's a significant reduction from the documented obligation," Marcus said finally. "It's the actual obligation, which Rourke's own lawyers would tell him if he asked them honestly." Logan picked up his coffee again. "He gets 2 things from this deal: the money he's legitimately owed, and a clean exit from a situation that is going to get very messy for him if it goes the other direction." He paused. "Cameron's accountant has documentation. My contact in Denver has had 12 hours to look at the secondary contract clauses, and he's got opinions. Rourke might beat us in court, eventually. But he'd spend more than the contested amount getting there, and courts in Colorado don't look kindly at what those penalty structures imply." He put down the cup. 6 months, he said. "That's what we're asking for. 6 months to get the property developed and generating revenue. At the end of 6 months, Rourke gets paid the legitimate debt in full, and the contract is dissolved." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at his own hands on the table, which was the tell Logan had been waiting for. It was the gesture of someone who knew they were going to have to deliver something their employer wasn't going to like, and was preparing for it. "I'll relay the proposal," Marcus said. "You do that." Logan paid for his own coffee, nodded to Deb on his way out, and didn't look at the man at the second table. Outside, the temperature had come up maybe 4 degrees since morning, which in February in Pine Hollow felt almost like generosity. The main street was half plowed, sand and grit over the compacted snow, and 2 locals were clearing the sidewalk in front of the hardware store with the unhurried efficiency of people who had done this every winter of their lives. He sat in the truck for a moment before starting the engine. He was running the numbers again, this time the real ones. His savings, the equity in the house, what a small business loan would look like against a commercial property in this county, what 6 months of construction and build-out actually cost. It was going to be tight. It was going to be genuinely, uncomfortably tight. He started the truck. When he got back to the house, Cameron was at the kitchen table with both of his daughters, and what appeared to be the entire contents of the refrigerator's vegetable drawer spread across the counter. She was teaching Haley how to julienne a carrot, which Haley was approaching with the focused intensity she brought to everything. Brooke had already lost interest in julienning and was making what she described as a salad sculpture. "How did it go?" Cameron asked, without turning from the carrot. "I made a proposal." "What kind of proposal?" He told her. She listened the same way she had before, completely, without interrupting. Haley appeared to also be listening, though she maintained focus on the carrot. Brooke had moved on from the salad sculpture to arranging cucumber slices in a spiral and was humming something. When he finished, Cameron set down the knife. "You offered to mortgage your house," she said, "among other things." "Logan, the property is the key," he said. "The property makes the deal credible. Without it, all we're doing is asking Rourke to take a smaller number and trust us to pay it. He won't do that. But if there's a physical asset, a development underway, revenue projections he can look at. I understand why it works," she said. "I'm asking if you understand what you're risking." He looked at her. She was standing at his kitchen counter, wearing yesterday's clothes, with a kitchen knife in her hand and a bruise on her shin and a cut on her forehead, and she was looking at him with an expression that wasn't gratitude and wasn't challenge exactly. It was something that lived between those two things, something that was trying to take him seriously without letting him be careless on her behalf. "I understand what I'm risking," he said. "Your daughters live here." "I know where my daughters live." She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up the knife again and looked at the carrot and said quietly, "The truck stop location is good. If the traffic counts are what I think they are, a well-executed concept could break even inside of 5 months." She paused. "I know how to execute." "I know you do." "The build-out would need to be fast. I'd have to bring in someone I trust for the kitchen design, and we'd need a general contractor who could move on an accelerated schedule." "I know a contractor," Logan said. "Of course you do." Something crossed her face that might have been the beginning of a real smile. "Is there anyone in this town you don't know?" "Roy at the Ridgeline Motel, but that's mostly because he can't hear me when I call." Haley looked up from the carrot. "Dad calls him and just talks louder and louder until Roy either hears him or hangs up." "That's accurate," Logan said. Cameron did smile then. It was brief and uneven and left quickly, the way smiles did on people who hadn't had many reasons for them recently. But it was real. They ate lunch, sir. The vegetables had become an actual, reasonably decent stir-fry, which Brooke regarded as a scientific miracle. And nobody talked about Harlan Rourke or debt figures or what Logan had offered up against the outcome of a meeting at a diner with 12 tables. The conversation was about Haley's recorder piece and whether Brooke's salad sculpture counted as a contribution to the meal, and the specific qualities of the cedar smell in the guest room, which Haley maintained was objectively excessive. Logan's phone was on the counter and he could see it from the table. He didn't look at it. It buzzed at 2:17. He looked at the screen. Marcus. He excused himself and picked up. "Mr. Rourke has considered your proposal," Marcus said. His voice had shifted slightly, still smooth, but with something different in the texture of it, a slight contraction that Logan read as the sound of someone who'd had an unpleasant conversation with their employer and was now managing the aftermath. "He has counter-proposals." "Let's hear them." "The 6-month timeline is acceptable. The debt figure is not. Mr. Rourke is willing to come down to $2.2 million, structured over the 6-month development period with a lien against the commercial property." 1.5, Logan said. "That's the number." "Mr. Vance, that's the number that a judge in Denver would look at and nod at. Rourke knows this." He paused. 2.2 doesn't get paid. It fails. And then we're in court and Rourke is explaining those penalty clauses to someone who has time to read them carefully. He let a moment pass. 1.5. Full payment at month 6. Lien against the Pine Hollow property during the development period. Clean contract dissolution on payment. Silence. "I'll call you back," Marcus said. Logan hung up. He stood in the back hallway again, leaning against the same wall, looking at the same ceiling. He could hear the girls clearing the lunch dishes, the sound of water running, Brooke saying something about the cucumber spiral she'd left on the counter, and Cameron's voice answering. 14 minutes later, Marcus called back. "Mr. Rourke accepts the terms," Marcus said. There was something flat in it, the sound of a man delivering words that weren't his idea. 1.5 million, 6-month development period. Lien against the commercial property. Payment in full at month 6, with contract dissolution on receipt. I want it in writing by tomorrow morning. That can be arranged. And the following up of the women, the surveillance, the calls, the men you put near the house. There are no men. Marcus. Logan's voice was very quiet. Don't. I know there are. I want them gone today. That's part of the terms. He paused. Rourke gets his money. That's the deal. Everything else stops. Another silence, shorter this time. Agreed, Marcus said. Logan put the phone in his pocket and stood in the hallway for a moment without moving. He was aware of his own heartbeat, which was steady. It had been steady through the whole thing, through both calls, through the diner, through the numbers. That was an old thing, that steadiness. He'd worked hard to get it back after he'd left the service, during the period when it had deserted him, and he'd had to find it again a different way, without the structure of missions and training to hold it in place. He'd found it again through the girls, mostly, through the specific and unambiguous nature of what they needed from him. He walked back to the kitchen. Cameron was at the sink, finishing the last of the dishes. She had her back to him, but she turned when she heard him come in, and she read something in his face before he said anything. He took it, she said. 1.5, 6 months. Written agreement tomorrow. She turned fully from the sink. She had suds on her wrist from the dishes, and she didn't notice. She was looking at him with that expression again, the one that lived between gratitude and something else, something he didn't yet have the right name for. Logan, she said. We have work to do, he said. Real work. The property, the build-out, the concept, the financing. 6 months is not a lot of time. I know. So we start tomorrow. Tonight I want you to write down every piece of documentation you have, every meeting, every number, every email. Not for the deal, for insurance. He looked at her steadily. Rourke accepted too easily. She absorbed this. You think he's not done? I think a man like Rourke doesn't accept a 47% reduction in 12 minutes because he suddenly found his conscience. He accepted because he sees a better angle. Logan picked up the last dish from the rack and dried it. So we build the thing. We build it right. And we make sure that when he looks for the better angle, there isn't one. Haley was at the kitchen table again, back to her tablet. She'd been in earshot the whole time, which Logan had not missed and had decided was acceptable. She was 9, and 9 was old enough to understand that problems existed and adults dealt with them. She looked up now. Is it fixed? She asked. It started, Logan said. Haley considered this. That's not the same as fixed. No, he said. It's not. She nodded slowly, with the expression of someone filing information into the correct category, and went back to her tablet. From the living room, Brooke called out to ask if anyone wanted to play the card game again, the rules of which she had apparently been refining during lunch. Logan looked at Cameron across the kitchen. She was looking at him with something that had changed in the last few minutes, some small shift in how she was holding herself, the particular quality of the way she was standing in his kitchen with dish soap on her wrist. Less like someone who was waiting for the next bad thing. More like someone who had, for the first time in a while, an actual plan to stand inside of. I'll play, Cameron called toward the living room, without taking her eyes off Logan. He picked up the dish towel and hung it on the rack and thought about 6 months and a truck stop on a mountain highway, and a woman who had once loved what she built and was going to have to build something entirely new to get any of it back. Outside, the snow had stopped. The sky was still gray, the particular gray that came after a storm passed through and the air hadn't decided yet what to become. In the yard, Haley's bike was buried under 8 inches of white, just the handlebars showing, and the porch light caught the surface of the snow and made it look, for a moment, like something worth keeping. The written agreement arrived the next morning by email, attached to a message from a Denver law firm that Logan had never heard of, and whose name had 3 partners' surnames strung together in the way that expensive law firms always did. He forwarded it to his contact in Denver, the former teammate, whose name was Daniel Reeves, and who had spent 8 years after leaving the service, becoming the kind of corporate attorney that other corporate attorneys found inconvenient. And Daniel called back in 40 minutes. It's mostly clean, Daniel said. The lien structure is standard. The payment terms are what you negotiated. There are 2 clauses I'd reword. I'll send you the language. One of them is just sloppy drafting. The other one is not sloppy. It's a default acceleration provision that gives them the right to call the full amount immediately if they determine, in their sole judgment, that the development is not progressing adequately. Meaning they can decide at any point that we're behind and demand everything at once. Meaning exactly that. It's buried in paragraph 14, standard-looking boilerplate that isn't standard. Logan was standing in the backyard in the cold with his phone, watching through the kitchen window where Cameron was making coffee and talking to Haley about something that had Haley nodding with unusual frequency, which meant it was a subject she actually found interesting. Didn't you get that clause removed? He asked. I can try. They'll push back. Whether they push hard or just let it go will tell you something about how serious they are about the clean exit. Send me the revised language. Let's see what they do. Daniel sent it inside an hour. Marcus called inside of 2. The clause was removed without argument. Logan told Cameron, and she looked at him with the expression he was beginning to recognize as her version of surprise, a brief moment before the processing closed over it. He let it go too fast, she said. That's what I thought. He has another angle. Yes. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. The agreement was open on Logan's laptop between them, 22 paragraphs of legal language that represented the most expensive thing he had ever signed his name to, and the room was quiet except for the sound of Brooke somewhere upstairs, performing what appeared to be an elaborate imaginative scenario involving several stuffed animals and a disputed territory. "We still sign it," Logan said, "because the deal gives us 6 months, and 6 months is what we need. But we build everything like he's going to try something in month 5. "What do you think he's planning?" "I don't know yet, which means we need to know more about him than he thinks we do." That became the shape of the first 2 weeks. By day, they worked on the property. Logan drove out to the Callaway site the morning after the agreement was signed, and Cameron rode with him. Her leg improved enough that she could walk the lot without favoring it, though she still moved carefully on the uneven ground. Ray Pelletier met them there with a measuring tape and the particular expression of a man who had seen a lot of abandoned properties and could read their histories from the outside. The building was a single-story concrete block structure, maybe 4,000 square feet, with a canopy over what had been the fuel island and a parking lot that could hold 40 vehicles if you were thoughtful about it. The roof had held. The interior had the dead, compressed smell of a place that had been sealed for years. Old grease and stale air, and something underneath that might have been the ghost of 1,000 truck stop coffees. Half the ceiling tiles had come down. The commercial kitchen in the back was stripped to the studs on one wall, but otherwise mostly intact, which Ray pointed at significantly. "That's your saving," Ray said. "Kitchen bones are there. Grease trap's still good. If you're not reconfiguring the layout, you're saving yourself 60, 70,000 right there." Cameron had walked directly to the kitchen when they came in. The way Logan had noticed she walked directly to the kitchen in any building. The way people who spent years in a trade developed an involuntary pull toward the thing they understood best. She stood in the middle of the stripped room and turned slowly, looking at the walls, the hood positions, the placement of the utility connections. "It's a good footprint," she said. "Whoever designed the original kitchen knew what they were doing. The flow is right." "What would you change?" Logan asked. She was quiet for a moment, still turning, reading the room the way someone reads a page. "I'd open the service window to the dining area. Let people see the kitchen. Not a full open kitchen, but a visual connection. It changes the feel of the whole place." She walked to the back wall. "And I'd put a separate entry for the trucker side. Same kitchen, different service counter, different atmosphere. Truckers don't want to eat in the same room where a family is having birthday pancakes. They want their own counter, their own corner, somewhere they can sit for 20 minutes without feeling like they're in the way." Ray looked at Logan. Logan looked at Cameron. "She's right," Ray said. "About the counter. I've been stopping at truck stops for 40 years. "You drive a pickup," Logan said. "The principle stands." The county accepted their offer on the property at $162,000, which was $14,000 less than the assessed value and $6,000 less than Logan had hoped for, which he took as confirmation that the universe occasionally cooperated. The commercial loan came through at a rate that was, as Ray had predicted, ugly but functional. Logan's house equity covered the down payment and the first phase of build-out costs. Cameron liquidated 3 investment accounts she'd kept out of the company's books. Personal savings, the kind she'd accumulated methodically and quietly over years, a habit she said came from watching her parents lose everything once and deciding she'd never be entirely without a floor. "How much?" Logan asked when she told him. "Enough to cover the kitchen equipment and the first hire." She said it in the flat tone she used for financial information, the same tone she'd used in the kitchen that first morning when she'd written down the debt figures. "I've been sitting on it. I didn't want to use it because I knew if Rourke found out I had it, he'd have added it to the obligation somehow." "He doesn't know about those accounts?" "He knows about everything connected to the company. These were personal, held separately, different institution, different name structure." She paused. "I was careful." "You were planning ahead." "I was afraid," she said. "There's a difference. Planning ahead implies confidence. I was just trying to make sure there was something left if everything else went wrong." He looked at her. She was standing in the gutted dining room with a legal pad in one hand and a flashlight in the other, her hair pulled back, wearing a coat that wasn't designed for construction sites, but that she'd adapted to without complaint. And she said it without self-pity, not performing toughness, not asking to be told it wasn't that bad, just saying the accurate thing. "That's still planning ahead," he said. She wrote something on the legal pad and didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. Ray brought in a crew of 6 in the second week. They were local men, most of them, people Logan knew by name, and a couple he'd worked alongside on other jobs in the county. They worked the way mountain crews worked, steadily, without a lot of talk, measuring twice, and not particularly interested in being told how to do things they'd been doing for 20 years. Cameron learned their names in the first 2 days and remembered them, which Logan noticed the crew noticed. The days fell into a rhythm that was hard and specific. Logan was at the site by 7, managing the construction sequencing and the supplier relationships and the constant small crises of a commercial build-out. The refrigeration unit that arrived with a damaged compressor, the permits that needed a second signature from a county official who was only in his office on Tuesdays and Thursdays, the wall that came down to reveal a water line running in a place that wasn't on any drawing. Cameron drove out mid-morning after getting the girls to school. She had started doing this in the second week, without discussion, simply appearing at the truck at 7:45 with Haley's lunch packed and Brooke's hair in a braid that was better than anything Logan could manage, and spent her days working on the concept, the menu, the supplier contracts, the staffing plan. She had a legal pad for everything, different colored pens for different categories, a system Logan didn't fully understand but could see was functional. She sat on a sawhorse or a cooler or whatever flat surface was available and wrote and called and wrote more. The phone wedged between her ear and shoulder while she made notes, talking to former colleagues and food distributors, and a kitchen designer in Denver named Petra, who drove up one Saturday and spent 4 hours arguing cheerfully with Cameron about the service window before agreeing she'd been right. The girls came out on weekends. This had not been part of any plan Logan made. It happened because Brooke asked to see where the restaurant was going to be, and Logan couldn't find a good reason to say no, and then it became the thing they did on Saturdays, the 4 of them at the site, the girls wearing the smallest hard hats Ray could find in his truck, which were still too large and sat on their ears. Haley gravitated toward the kitchen. She stood in the developing space and asked Ray's crew precise technical questions that they answered with the straight faces of people who had decided to take her seriously, which Logan appreciated. She had opinions about the service window position that turned out to align with Cameron's, which Cameron pointed out with a kind of satisfaction that was partly professional and partly something else. Brooke was interested in the sign. The old Callaway sign had come down in the first week, a rusted monolith that Ray's crew removed with more effort than anticipated because the base had been poured in what Ray described as an unreasonable amount of concrete. What went up in its place was Cameron's decision, and she thought about it for almost 2 weeks before she had it made. Brooke was the one who asked what it was going to say. Pine Hollow Crossing, Cameron said. Why crossing? Because this is where Highway 23 crosses the mountain road. It's where things meet. She looked at the empty signpost. And because crossing something usually means you're on your way somewhere, that felt right for a place where people stop. Brooke thought about this with her characteristic seriousness. I like it, she said. It sounds like something that was already there before the restaurant. Cameron looked at the child beside her and then at Logan, who was pretending to read something on a clipboard. That's exactly what I was going for, she said. The evenings were quieter. Cameron had moved from the guest room into the de facto arrangement of simply living in the house, which happened so gradually that Logan couldn't have identified the exact day it stopped being temporary. Her things migrated from a single bag to the closet. Her coffee was in this cabinet. She knew which burner on the stove ran hot and which drawer the scissors were in, and the particular trick of the back door lock that required lifting the handle slightly before turning the key. She and Logan had an arrangement about the evenings that was also unspoken. She cooked 3 nights a week, he cooked 2, and the remaining nights were whoever got home earliest. She was a significantly better cook, which she didn't point out, and he acknowledged once, and then they both let lie. He was better at bedtime, the specific rituals of it, the particular books, the negotiation over how many minutes of reading Brooke actually needed versus how many she claimed. And she learned to stay out of it without being asked. They sat together after the girls were in bed. Sometimes they worked, she on the business plan, he on the construction schedule. And sometimes they talked, not always about the restaurant or the deal, sometimes about other things. Where she'd grown up, eastern Colorado, a town smaller than Pine Hollow. How she'd come to restaurants, her grandmother's kitchen, a summer job, a community college business course that had crystallized something she'd already known. What had happened with the girl's mother, Logan told her, one evening, in the plainest terms he could manage. She'd left when Brooke was 8 months old, not dramatically, not with a fight, just steadily and then completely, and he'd stopped expecting her to reconsider around the time Brooke learned to walk. Cameron listened to that last part without filling the silence afterward with the things people usually filled it with. She just sat with it for a moment, and then she said, "Do they ask about her?" "Haley used to. She doesn't anymore, which I don't know whether to be relieved about." He looked at his hands. "Brooke never really... She doesn't have enough memory of her to miss her, which is either better or worse, depending on the day." "Haley's protecting you," Cameron said. He looked up. "She stopped asking because she figured out that the asking cost you something," Cameron said. 9-year-olds do that. They're more aware than we think." He sat with this. He didn't agree or disagree, but he turned it over in his mind for several days after, the way you turned something over that fit the shape of an empty space you'd had for a while. In the 4th week, something shifted in the financial records. Cameron had been going through documentation every evening, the complete history of her dealings with Rourke's organization, every contract addendum, every payment record, every email she'd retained. She was building the insurance file that Logan had told her to build, the one they would need if Rourke moved on the default acceleration clause that had been removed from the signed agreement, but whose absence from the document didn't necessarily mean the impulse behind it was gone. She came downstairs one Tuesday night after the girls were in bed with a legal pad covered in red ink and sat down across from Logan at the kitchen table with the expression of someone who had found something they weren't sure they wanted to have found. "Look at this," she said. She laid out 3 pages. They were payment records, her payments to Rourke's organization over the first 18 months of the loan. She had the original receipts, the wire transfer confirmations, the acknowledgement emails. "I paid $1.1 million in 18 months, she said. "I know that. I've always known that. But look at how it was applied." She pointed to a column on the 2nd page. "According to their records, which my accountant got copies of during the dispute, 60% of everything I paid was applied to fees and interest, 40% to principal. That's a bad ratio, but not unusual for... Look at the fee category," she said. He looked. The fee lines were labeled with codes, 3-letter codes that corresponded to a schedule in the original contract. He'd seen the contract. He remembered the fee schedule. "Those codes don't match the fee schedule," he said. "They don't match any schedule in any document I signed." She was very still. "I've been through every addendum, every exhibit. Those codes reference a fee structure that doesn't exist in my paperwork." She paused. "Which means either there's a document I never received, or the fees were fabricated," Logan said. "Yes." They looked at each other across this table. "How much?" Logan asked. She had done the arithmetic. He could see it on the legal pad, the numbers worked through in the red ink. "Somewhere between $300,000 and $400,000 of what I paid them was applied to fees that have no contractual basis." She looked at the pages. "Which means my actual outstanding legitimate principal, properly calculated, is closer to $900,000, not 1.5. Logan sat back. He was thinking about Marcus accepting the removal of that clause without argument. I was thinking about Rourke settling at 1.5 in 12 minutes, when his opening position had been 2.9. "He's still overstating the amount," Logan said, "even at 1.5. By at least $500,000, maybe more if my accountant goes through the full record. He accepted our deal because 1.5 was still a profit on fraudulent fees." "Yes." Her voice was flat. "And if we pay it, we're validating the fraud, quietly, without any record of objection." Logan looked at the ceiling. This was the angle. This was what Rourke had seen when he'd accepted the terms quickly. Not that the deal was fair, but that payment without protest was admission. That if they paid and signed the dissolution agreement, they were handing him a clean exit from something that wasn't clean at all. "We need to talk to Daniel," Logan said. "Tonight?" "Tomorrow morning, early." He pulled the legal pad toward him and looked at the numbers. "And we need your accountant, the real one, not the one who worked for the company." "Petra," Cameron said. "She's in Denver. She's already looked at some of this." "Call her tonight. Tell her what you found. Tell her I need a complete forensic analysis, every payment, every fee, every code, cross-referenced against every document you signed. I want a number I can stand behind in front of a regulator." Cameron was already reaching for her phone. Then she stopped. She looked at him across the table, and the look had something complicated in it. The weight of what she'd just found sitting alongside something else. something that was about the larger shape of the situation rather than just this specific discovery. "Logan," she said, "if we take this to a regulator, it's not quiet anymore. The agreement, the deal, the 6 months, all of it changes." "I know." Rourke will respond. He has lawyers, he has relationships, he'll make it difficult and expensive, and Cameron. He said her name the way he had before, with weight. "He's been stealing from you for 3 years, not taking advantage of bad terms you signed, stealing, billing you for fees that don't exist." He held her gaze. "I'm not paying him $1.5 million of your money and mine for something that never happened. And I'm not letting him walk away clean from fraud because the quiet version is easier." She was quiet. She looked at the pages on the table. "He's dangerous," she said. Not warning him, telling him something she needed to say. "I know that too. He has people, and when he feels cornered, he's going to feel cornered regardless," Logan said. "The only question is whether he feels cornered when we're ready or when he decides. I'd rather it be when we're ready." He pulled his phone toward him. "Build the file. Everything Petra can document, everything you can access, everything you wrote in those notepads." He looked at her steadily. "We're not running from this. We're putting it somewhere it can't be made to disappear." She nodded once. Then she dialed Petra. He listened from across the table while she talked, her voice low and precise, laying out the fee codes and the discrepancies in the clean, specific language of someone who had spent years learning to translate financial complexity into clear sentences. Petra asked questions. Cameron answered them. At one point, Petra said something that made Cameron close her eyes briefly and then open them and say, I know that. Can you document it?" She hung up at 11:15. "She found more," Cameron said. "On a different payment cycle, the same fee codes. She says when she has it fully traced, it's probably closer to $500,000 in unbased fees total." "Okay. Logan," she stopped, started again. "This is going to cost you. The legal costs alone." "Daniel works on contingency for fraud cases," Logan said. "He mentioned it when we talked about the contract. I didn't say anything at the time because I didn't know yet whether we'd need it." He picked up his phone and typed a message to Daniel. Short and specific, the way Daniel preferred. "We're not the ones who should be worried about costs. Rourke is." The next weeks ran faster and heavier than the ones before. The restaurant build-out continued because stopping it served nobody. Pine Hollow Crossing was their legitimate business, their documented purpose, the evidence of good faith performance under the agreement. Ray's crew finished the kitchen rough-in, the service counters took shape, the walls went up painted in the warm colors Cameron had chosen, not the corporate palette of chain restaurants, something with more variation in it, colors that looked like they'd been decided by an actual person. The sign went up in week 5. Brooke stood in the parking lot and looked at it with her hands in her pockets and said, "It looked like it had always been there," and Cameron pressed her lips together and didn't say anything for a moment. Simultaneously, in a Denver office that Rourke's people didn't know about, Daniel Reeves and Petra Nunez, Cameron's accountant, were building a case document that grew by the day. Petra had access to 3 years of financial records. She was meticulous, and she was fast, and by the end of the 5th week she had traced and documented $487,000 in fees applied to Cameron's account under codes that existed in no signed document. Daniel had consulted with a colleague who specialized in financial fraud, and the colleague had used the word clear in his assessment, which Daniel said was not a word his colleague used lightly. Logan knew something was shifting on Rourke's side around the beginning of the 6th week. He knew it the way he'd known things were shifting in places far less comfortable than Pine Hollow. A change in the texture of the communication, a slight alteration in the pattern. Marcus stopped calling with the small check-ins he'd been making every 10 days. A man Logan didn't recognize drove slowly past the house twice in one afternoon and didn't stop, which Logan noted and photographed and sent to Daniel. He didn't tell Cameron about the car. He told her the next morning because he'd decided a long time ago that not telling her things was not actually protecting her and was mostly just making decisions for her that she was entitled to make herself. She looked at the photograph on his phone. "He knows we found something," she said, "or he suspects. Either way, his timeline is moving." "How long do we have?" "Daniel's filing the complaint with the State Financial Crimes Unit this week. Once it's filed, Rourke loses the ability to control the narrative." He handed her phone back. "We need to accelerate the restaurant opening." We were planning on 3 more weeks. Can we do it in 10 days? She thought about it. He could see her running the list internally. What was done, what was close, what was not close. The kitchen passed inspection Friday. The dining room needs the last of the furniture and the signage inside. Staffing. I have 6 people ready. I need to bring them up from Denver or find local. She paused. There's a woman in town, Deb, at the Ridgeback. She mentioned once she was looking for something different. I know Deb, Logan said. Of course you do. She's been there 11 years. She knows every trucker who comes through Pine Hollow. I'll talk to her today. Cameron was already making notes. 10 days is possible. It won't be perfect. It doesn't need to be perfect. It needs to be open. She looked up from the pad. Logan, when the complaint is filed, Rourke will try to use the default clause that isn't in the contract, Logan said. He'll claim breach, claim the development isn't proceeding, try to accelerate payment of the 1.5. Daniel has the signed agreement with that clause removed, and he has the fraud documentation. He met her eyes. An open restaurant is proof of performance. An open restaurant on Highway 23 is something nobody can argue with. She nodded slowly. Then she said something he hadn't expected. I'm sorry. For what? For all of it. For landing in your ditch. For bringing this into your house, into your daughter's lives. Cameron. He stopped her, not unkindly. You were crying for help in a car wreck. I stopped. That's the whole origin story. He held her gaze. I don't need you to be sorry for needing help. I need you to be ready for the next 10 days. She looked at him for a long moment. There were things moving across her face that she wasn't trying to hide, which was different from how she'd been in the early days, when she'd controlled her expression the way she controlled everything, tightly, carefully, as if showing the wrong thing at the wrong moment had real consequences. It probably had. For a long time, it probably had. I'm ready, she said. Pine Hollow Crossing opened on a Thursday in early April, which was not the dramatic launch that Cameron's previous restaurant openings had been. No press event, no social media campaign, no influencers with cameras. The sign was lit. The parking lot was plowed. Deb was behind the counter at 6 in the morning with the particular efficiency of someone who had been doing this exact thing for years and was simply doing it in a different building now. 2 other staff members, locals, both, a retired couple Cameron had hired for the morning shift, were in the dining room. The first customer arrived at 6:17, a truck driver from Kansas City named Walt, who had been driving Highway 23 for 9 years and stopped at the old Callaway site out of reflex before remembering it had been closed for years and then seeing the lights. He ordered eggs and coffee and looked around the room with the expression of a man who had not expected to find something good. You just open? He asked Deb. Today, she said. Huh. He looked around again. It's nice. It's actually nice. By 8:30, there were 14 vehicles in the lot. By 10, Cameron was in the kitchen running a second line because the morning rush hadn't stopped the way she'd expected it to. Logan was in the parking lot managing an overflow situation he hadn't anticipated and calling Ray about expanding the lot on the east side. Haley and Brooke came after school. Brooke went directly to stand under the sign and look at it again. Haley went directly to the kitchen and began asking Cameron precise questions about ticket management that Cameron answered seriously and completely. At 4:17 that afternoon, Logan's phone rang. Daniel. It's filed, Daniel said. State Financial Crimes Unit received the complaint at 2:08 today. Full documentation package, fraud analysis, fee tracing, the whole record. A pause. Rourke's lawyers called my office at 3:45. What did they say? They asked if there was any interest in resolution before this became public record. Daniel's voice had something in it that was not quite satisfaction, but was adjacent to it. I told them we'd consider any proposal that began with full acknowledgement of the fraudulent fee applications and a recalculation of the legitimate debt balance. And they said they'd call back. Another pause. They'll call back. Logan stood outside Pine Hollow Crossing in the thin April light, watching a semi from Nevada pull carefully into the lot. The driver's eyes already on the sign, already making the calculation about whether this was the kind of place worth stopping for. The mountains were still snow-capped to the west, the valley between them green at the edges where the spring was just beginning to make itself known, tentative and cold but real. Through the window, he could see the dining room, the warm colors Cameron had chosen, the light that came through the service window from the kitchen, the careful geometry of the tables that were almost all full. He could see Deb moving with the unhurried competence of someone in their element. He could see Cameron's shoulder through the pass, the only part of her visible from this angle, moving with the controlled efficiency of someone who had stopped being afraid of what she was capable of. He thought about 6 months, which was what they'd bargained for, and he thought about the 4.5 that were left, and he thought about Harlan Rourke sitting in whatever office Harlan Rourke sat in, waiting for his lawyers to call back, looking at a fraud complaint with his name on it, and a restaurant on Highway 23 that was already on its second parking overflow of the day. The Nevada driver got out of his cab and stretched and looked at the sign and headed for the door. Logan went inside to find out what needed doing next, which was what he had always done, what he was better at than most things he could name. Not the grand gesture, not the dramatic stand, but the next practical thing, and then the one after that, until the shape of what you were building was clear enough that other people could see it too. The kitchen smelled like coffee and something with herbs that Cameron had added to the morning special without telling anyone, and the sound of it, the particular sound of a full restaurant working at capacity, voices and plates, and the efficient noise of people who knew their jobs, filled the building from the counter to the back wall. And it was the sound, Logan thought, of something that was not going to be taken away. Rourke's lawyers called back in 48 hours. Logan had expected it to take longer. The speed told him something. Not that Rourke was afraid exactly, but that the fraud complaint had landed in a place that mattered to him, some intersection of reputation and exposure that his lawyers had assessed quickly and apparently with urgency. Men like Harlan Rourke built their entire operational structure on the assumption that the people they pressured didn't have the resources or the nerve to push back formally. The complaint had changed the geometry of his position in ways that a phone call at 2 a.m. or a car driving slowly past a house could not fix. Daniel called while Logan was in the Pine Hollow Crossing parking lot at 7 a.m, helping Ray mark the expansion boundaries for the east lot. They want to negotiate, Daniel said. Not through Marcus this time. Senior partner from their firm called me directly. That's a shift. What are they offering? They're not offering yet. They're asking what resolution looks like from our side, which means they're trying to figure out how much we actually have before they show their hand. A pause. I told them I'd consult with my client and call back by end of day. Logan looked at the chalk line Ray was drawing in the gravel and thought for a moment. Tell them resolution looks like a full forensic accounting, independent auditor of our choosing, recalculation of the legitimate debt based on documented terms only, and repayment to Cameron of any amounts collected above the legitimate figure. Silence on Daniel's end. Then, you want them to pay her back. She overpaid by close to $500,000. That's her money. Logan, I know it's aggressive. Tell them anyway. Let's see what they do with it. What they did with it was come back in 4 hours with a counteroffer. They would acknowledge the fee discrepancies as administrative errors, recalculate the outstanding balance using the documented terms, and reduce the final payment amount by the overpayment figure. They would not issue a repayment check. The outstanding balance after recalculation would be applied against what Cameron owed, and if the overpayment exceeded the balance, the remainder would be returned. Daniel walked Logan through the math on a call that evening, both of them on the phone while Logan sat at the kitchen table and Cameron sat across from him listening to his side of the conversation. After the recalculation, Daniel said, the legitimate outstanding balance is $912,000. The documented overpayment is $479,000. Applied against the balance, Cameron owes $433,000. Upon payment of that amount, the contract is dissolved and the lien against the Pine Hollow property is released. Logan looked at Cameron. She had a pen in her hand and was not writing anything, just holding it, looking at a point on the table somewhere between her and him. 433, he said. Yes. Can we do that in the current operating window? You tell me. I don't know your cash position. He did know. He'd been tracking it daily for 2 months. Pine Hollow Crossing had been running above projections since the 3rd week. Not dramatically, not in a way that made anyone wealthy, but solidly and consistently, the kind of numbers that meant the concept worked and the location was what they'd believed it to be, combined with the construction loan structure and what Cameron still had in her personal accounts, the $433,000 was manageable. Tight, genuinely tight, the kind of tight that would require 3 careful months and no unexpected disasters, but manageable. "We can do it," Logan said. "Then I'd recommend taking the deal. The fraud complaint stays on record regardless. Filing doesn't get withdrawn as part of this. I made that clear, and they accepted it." Rourke walks away having paid a penalty through the recalculation, and the State Financial Crimes Unit has the complete documentation if they choose to pursue it independently. Daniel paused. "Which, based on conversations I've had, they likely will. This isn't the first complaint against entities connected to Rourke. Ours has the best documentation." Logan told Cameron everything after he hung up. She listened the way she always listened, completely. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, and the quiet was different from the silences she'd had early on, the controlled ones where she was deciding how much to show. This one was just her sitting with something. 4:33, she said finally. "Yes." "And the complaint stays filed?" "Yes." "And it's over?" He looked at her carefully. "The financial part is over. The legal exposure for Rourke is just beginning. That part we don't control anymore. It's with the state." He paused. "But for you and the company and this place, yes. It's over." She set the pen down on the table. She looked at it. Then she looked up at him, and he saw something in her face that he hadn't seen before, and not relief, which he'd seen pieces of at different moments, and not the brief satisfaction she'd shown when things went right. This was something older and quieter than either of those. The expression of someone setting down a weight they'd carried so long they'd forgotten what their own posture felt like without it. "Okay," she said. They signed the revised agreement 3 days later. Daniel handled it remotely and efficiently, and the lien release came through the following week. Logan stood in the county records office for 11 minutes while a woman named Sandra processed the paperwork, and when Sandra handed him the stamped copy, he folded it in half and put it in his jacket pocket and drove back to Pine Hollow Crossing and went back to work. He didn't make an announcement about it. He told Cameron, who nodded once and went back to the conversation she'd been having with the morning prep cook about the herb supplier's delivery schedule. He told Ray, who said good, in the tone of a man for whom one word was sufficient for most things. He didn't tell the girls right away, partly because he wasn't sure how to explain what had been resolved, and partly because they had already adapted to the new shape of their lives with the completeness that children managed when the new shape was stable enough. And explaining the formal end of something they hadn't been told the full details of seemed unnecessarily disruptive. Haley figured it out anyway. She came to him the following Saturday morning while he was in the kitchen making breakfast and Cameron was still upstairs, and she stood in the doorway with her arms crossed in the posture she used when she had something to say that she'd been thinking about for a while. "It's done," she said. "The problem? With the men?" He looked at her. "Yes." She nodded, uncrossed her arms. "Cameron's staying." It wasn't a question. I wasn't entirely sure it was a statement either. It was somewhere between an observation and something she was trying on, testing its weight. "I think so," he said. "If that's okay." Haley looked at the stove for a moment. "She braids Brooke's hair better than you do. That's a low bar." "It's still true." She picked up an apple from the bowl on the counter and bit into it and left the kitchen with the decisive efficiency of someone who had completed the conversation they came for. Logan stood at the stove and thought about all the things his daughter had not said and had not needed to. The spring moved into summer with the particular slowness and speed of seasons in the mountains, slow in the valleys, where the cold held longer than it had any right to, and fast on the slopes, where the snow retreated in weeks and left behind the vivid, almost aggressive green of high-altitude grass. Highway 23 came alive in those warmer months in ways the winter hadn't hinted at. The trucker traffic didn't diminish, it increased, because word traveled the way it traveled between people who drove the same roads every week and needed reliable information about where to eat and where not to. But the warmer weather added a different kind of traveler, families on road trips, motorcyclists coming through the passes, people driving from Denver to ski areas who stopped on their way back because someone had mentioned the place. By June, Cameron had hired 12 people. 9 of them were from Pine Hollow or within 20 miles of it. 3 were people she'd brought up from her Denver operation, experienced kitchen staff she trusted with training and standards. Deb had become, without anyone formally assigning the title, the institutional memory of the front of house, The person who knew every regular and remembered which trucker took his coffee. Black and which one was on a diet his wife had put him on and needed to be steered toward the right options without being made to feel managed. The restaurant had found its own character, the way places did when they were run by people who actually cared about what they were building. It wasn't trying to be something imported from somewhere else. It felt like it had grown out of the ground at that specific location on that specific highway, which was the hardest thing to manufacture and the only thing that couldn't be manufactured at all. Logan handled the operational side, the vendors, the facility maintenance, the expansion of the east lot that Ray completed in May, the relationship with the county that had become, surprisingly, a productive one. The county had watched the Callaway property sit vacant for 4 years. What Pine Hollow Crossing had become in 4 months was the kind of thing that made local officials look good and brought them around for lunch more often than strictly necessary. He also took the construction jobs he'd always taken, because the restaurant was not yet generating the kind of income that made him comfortable letting his contracting work lapse entirely, and because he had daughters who would want to go to college, and because he was constitutionally unable to have only one thing going at a time. Cameron said once that he didn't know how to rest, and he said that was inaccurate, and she said, "Name one time in the last 4 months that you sat down without something in your hands," and he thought about it for a genuine moment and couldn't. "That's not a character flaw," he said. "I didn't say it was." She was folding the girls' laundry, which she had also started doing at some point without discussion. "I said you don't know how to rest. Those are different things." He watched her fold one of Brooke's shirts, the small, precise movements of someone who'd learned to be efficient about domestic things because efficiency was how she got everything done. "You're not resting either." "No," she agreed. "But I know I'm not. You think you are." He sat with this. "You're very annoying," he said. "I know." She put Brooke's shirt on the pile without looking up, and the corner of her mouth moved in the way that meant she was not going to acknowledge she was smiling. The state financial crimes investigation into Harlan Rourke's organization was not fast and was not dramatic. These things rarely were. It moved the way official investigations moved, methodically, with long, quiet periods that meant work was being done rather than nothing. Daniel kept Logan and Cameron informed through the summer and into the fall. 3 other businesses came forward with documentation once word spread that a complaint had been filed and was being taken seriously. A forensic accounting firm was retained by the state. The law firm that had represented Rourke's interests in their negotiations quietly withdrew from the case in August, which Daniel said was meaningful. In October, Rourke's primary holding company was issued a formal cease and desist from the State Financial Crimes Unit. 2 of his associates, not Marcus, but people higher in the organization, were named in a civil complaint. The Denver Business Press covered it in 2 paragraphs in a financial crimes roundup. It was not the public downfall that movies depicted. It was the specific, unglamorous consequence of documented fraud encountering a regulatory body with enough evidence to act, paperwork, findings, legal exposure that made the cost of continuing higher than the cost of stopping. Cameron read the article on her phone at the Pine Hollow Crossing counter on a Tuesday morning between the breakfast rush and the lunch setup. She read it twice. Then she put the phone face down on the counter and went back to the inventory she'd been doing. Deb, who had been watching from 3 stools away, said, "Good news?" "Something like that," Cameron said. "Someone stopped getting away with something." "About time," Deb said, in the tone she used for things that were obvious but still needed saying. Cameron picked up her clipboard and went back to the inventory. The anniversary of the accident fell in February, which Logan noted without planning to note it. It arrived in his awareness the way certain dates did, not because he'd been tracking them, but because something in the mind kept its own calendar. He was outside the restaurant at 6 in the morning before anyone else arrived, doing his usual walk of the lot and the building exterior that he did every morning without quite deciding to, checking the things that needed checking, because that was what you did when something was yours. Snow was falling, not the violent sideways snow of that night on the highway. This was the quiet kind, the kind that fell straight down in the absence of wind, each flake visible individually against the light from the parking lot fixtures. It was covering the lot at the rate of about half an inch an hour, and the forecast said it would stop by mid-morning, and Logan stood in it for a few minutes and let it fall on his shoulders and thought about nothing in particular, which was his version of reflection. Inside, the restaurant was warm and smelled like the first pots of coffee beginning to run. He thought about that night, not with any structure or narrative intent, just in the way you think about things that changed the shape of everything that came after. In flashes, in the specific sensory details that stayed when the larger sequence blurred, the crumpled black sedan at the bottom of the embankment, the sound of a voice asking for help from inside a crushed car, the cold of the mountain air, and the particular way his old training had come back without being summoned, every movement precise and purposeful in a way that his daily life didn't usually require. He thought about what he would have done if he'd driven past. He'd asked himself this before, in the early weeks, and the answer was always the same. He wouldn't have. Not because he was a hero, which he wasn't, and not because he was constitutionally incapable of self-preservation, which he also wasn't, but because he'd heard a person asking for help, and the distance between him and that ditch was 30 feet, and he was the only one there. That was the whole of it. There was no more complicated version. He'd thought for a long time that the most important things he'd done happened overseas, in places whose names he didn't say at dinner tables, in missions that had cost him things he didn't talk about to people who hadn't been there. He'd thought that leaving that life meant accepting that the significant part was behind him, that what remained was smaller, which was fine, which was maybe even a relief. That the job now was maintenance, keep the girls healthy and fed and educated and loved, keep the lights on, make it to next year. He'd been wrong about what remained being smaller. He just hadn't been able to see it yet. Cameron's car pulled into the lot at 6:47. She was always early, a quality she shared with him that they'd never discussed because it didn't require discussion. She got out and looked at the snow and then at him standing in it and said, "Why are you standing in the snow?" Thinking. You could think inside. It's better out here. She came to stand beside him, which she did without comment, her hands in her coat pockets. They stood for a moment looking at the lot, the sign above them throwing its amber light down onto the white surface, the mountain line barely visible through the falling snow in the early morning dark. 1 year, she said. Yes. She was quiet. He could see her breath in the air, small and regular. I wrote down what I remembered about that night, she said. Not recently, a few months ago. I found the page when I was cleaning out the notepad. What did you write? That I heard you before I saw you, that you said, I hear you before you said anything else. She paused. I didn't realize until I wrote it down that that was the thing. Not that you stopped, not that you got me out. That the first thing you said was that you heard me. Logan didn't say anything. The snow fell at its steady, windless rate. I hadn't been heard in a long time, she said. Not by anyone who wasn't either working for me or trying to take something from me. She wasn't looking at him, looking at the lot, but her voice was the voice of someone saying an accurate thing that had taken a while to locate. I'd forgotten what it felt like. And then there it was, in the middle of a car wreck in a blizzard. She shook her head slightly, the movement of someone who still found the specific shape of things surprising. Terrible timing. The timing was fine, Logan said. She looked at him then. He was looking at the mountain line, or where it would have been without the snow. She studied his profile for a moment with the directness she had, that quality of looking at things straight rather than sideways, which he'd come to realize was one of the things he most relied on in her. Logan, she said. I know, he said. I didn't say anything yet. I know what you were going to say. She was quiet for a moment. You don't know that. You were going to say something about not expecting this. That you came through that night with nothing left and didn't expect anything to be on the other side of it. And that it's strange to be standing here a year later with this. He gestured, a small movement that took in the restaurant, the lot, the sign, the surrounding dark. You were going to say it still doesn't feel entirely real. A pause. Close enough, she said. He looked at her then. She was looking at him, and the snow was on her shoulders and in her hair where it caught on the dark strands, and the parking lot light did what it did to everything under it, made it simpler than it was, flattened the details, reduced things to outline. But he'd been looking at her for a year in all kinds of light, and he knew the details. I'm not good at this, he said. The saying part. I know. I'm better at the doing part. I know that too. She held his gaze. You've been doing it for a year. He nodded once. Then he looked back at the mountains. Marry me, he said. He said it the way he said most things, without ceremony, without architecture around it, just the direct delivery of a thing he meant. Not because of the restaurant or the girls or the situation, because a year of doing this with you is the best year I've had in a long time, and I don't see any part of it that I want to do with someone else. The snow fell between them and around them and onto the shoulders of his jacket. She was looking at him with an expression that had moved past surprise into something quieter and more considered, the expression of someone taking something seriously that deserved to be taken seriously. "You said you weren't good at the saying part," she said. "I have my moments." She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating. He knew the difference between her silences now, knew which ones were uncertainty and which ones were simply someone who didn't answer until they knew what they meant. "Yes," she said. He nodded. She nodded. They stood in the snow for another minute, and then she said they should go inside because the morning prep staff would be arriving and someone needed to start the biscuit production, which she had personally standardized and trusted no one else to initiate without supervision. "Romantic," Logan said. "That's not my strongest category," she said, and she went inside. He stood in the snow for another 30 seconds, feeling the cold and the quiet, and the specific quality of a morning that was ordinary in all the ways that mattered. They married in June, not a large ceremony. Pine Hollow didn't have the infrastructure for large ceremonies, and neither of them had the patience for them. 16 people in the back section of Pine Hollow Crossing on a Saturday evening after closing, the tables pushed back and the windows open to the mountain air, and the long late light of a Colorado summer evening coming through at the angle it did at that hour, turning everything it touched the color of something worth keeping. Haley stood beside Cameron in a green dress she'd chosen herself and wore with the serious composure of someone performing an important function. Brooke stood beside Logan in a dress that was supposed to be the same green but was slightly different because she'd gone with Cameron to pick it out and had made an executive decision about the shade. And when Haley had pointed this out, Cameron had said both dresses were correct in the way that mattered, and Brooke had accepted this verdict with the serenity of someone who'd known all along. Ray Pelletier was there. Deb was there. Daniel had driven up from Denver. Petra had come from Denver too, and she and Cameron had talked about the restaurant financials for 20 minutes before the ceremony started, which Logan took as a sign that things were normal in the way he preferred. There was no band and no photographer, because neither of them had thought to arrange those things, and when someone mentioned it a week before the ceremony, they'd both looked at each other and determined it wasn't important enough to fix. Haley, who had been paying attention, had taken it upon herself to document the evening on Logan's phone with the methodical thoroughness she brought to everything, and the photographs were slightly too clinical but completely honest, which Logan decided was the right kind of wedding photograph to have. What he remembered most about the evening was not the ceremony itself, which was short and direct, or the dinner that followed, which Cameron had planned and which was the best meal most of the people there had ever eaten in Pine Hollow. What he remembered was the hour after dinner when things had loosened and people were talking in the easy way of people who had eaten well and were in no hurry, and he was standing near the window with a glass of something he wasn't drinking and watching the room. Brooke was asleep in a chair in the corner with her shoes off, having apparently decided the evening was complete. Haley was talking to Daniel about something. Whatever it was, Daniel was listening with the full attention he gave to clients, which meant Haley had found a subject worth discussing. Ray was telling Deb something that was making Deb shake her head in the particular way she shook it when something was both ridiculous and accurate. Cameron was across the room, talking to Petra, and she was laughing at something, a real laugh, the kind that arrived without her managing it, the full chest kind that he'd learned was actually in her repertoire, though it had taken months to appear regularly. She looked up and found him looking at her, and the laugh settled into something else, quieter and more personal, just for a moment before she went back to the conversation. He thought about what he'd believed when he left the Navy, that the measure of a life was in its highest moments, the missions that mattered, the times you'd been tested hardest and answered the right way, that everything after those moments was a kind of descent to a lower altitude, not shameful, but smaller, that you found the smaller life and you made your peace with it because the alternative was chasing something that was already finished. He'd been wrong about the altitude. The measure wasn't in the height of the moments. It was in what they opened into. The mission on the frozen highway had mattered not because of what he'd done in the ditch, which was simply what needed doing, but because of everything it had become. The small house in Pine Hollow, and the restaurant that smelled like coffee and herbs in the morning, and two daughters who were becoming people he genuinely respected, and the woman across the room who had walked into his life through a crushed car window and had never quite left. He wasn't sentimental about it. He didn't think it was fate or design or any particular plan. He thought it was the specific consequence of a decision he'd made on a frozen road because a stranger needed help and he was the one who was there. He thought that was enough of an explanation. He thought, in fact, that it was the whole explanation. That the ordinary decision to do what was in front of you, made at the right moment, was sometimes the thing that changed everything. There was a lesson in that, maybe. Or not a lesson exactly. He wasn't the type to draw lessons from his own life and announce them. More of an observation, the kind you made quietly and kept. That most of what mattered didn't announce itself in advance. That the moments you'd point to later, the ones that had actually shaped the course of things, often arrived looking like nothing in particular. A highway at night, a voice in the dark, a decision made in 30 seconds that you'd spend years understanding. That the people worth keeping were rarely found where you expected to look. That a family could be built out of almost anything, if the people building it were willing to do the work without knowing how it turned out. He set down the glass he hadn't drunk from and went across the room to stand beside his wife, who moved slightly without looking away from her conversation to make room for him, which she did the way you made room for something expected and wanted. 2 years after the night on Highway 23, Pine Hollow Crossing employed 21 people, had been written about in a regional travel publication as the best highway stop between Denver and the Utah border, and had finished its second consecutive profitable year. Logan had paid off the construction loan 8 months ahead of schedule. Cameron had restructured Ellison Hospitality Group with clean documentation and no outside investors. The state investigation into Rourke's organization had resulted in the dissolution of 3 of his holding companies and a personal civil judgment that his lawyers were appealing with the specific desperation of lawyers who know an appeal is unlikely to succeed. Harlan Rourke was not in prison because financial fraud cases rarely move that fast and the civil judgment was not criminal. But he was diminished in ways that men like him found more difficult to recover from than most people might have expected. Not just financially, but in the specific currency of reputation within the circles where his kind of power operated. The word had moved the way word moved in those worlds, quietly, precisely, and in ways that could not be recalled. He was no longer in anyone's plans. On the second anniversary, Logan was outside before sunrise again, the same walk of the same lot. The February morning was cold and clear this time. No snow, or not yet, the sky still holding what the night had left in it, the mountain line sharp against the first gray edge of the coming light. Cameron came out at 6:53, 7 minutes earlier than she'd arrived the year before, which he noticed because he noticed things. She stood beside him and looked at the same view he was looking at. The mountains. The highway, empty at this hour, running west toward the pass. The sign for Pine Hollow Crossing, lit against the dark, amber and steady. "You're thinking again," she said. Quiet thinking this time. "I can tell the difference." She put her hands in her pockets. "What about?" He thought about it. What it was specifically that he was thinking about. "That I almost drove past," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "But you didn't." "No." "Why not?" He looked at the highway. The first pale suggestion of light was beginning above the eastern ridge, the kind that arrived an hour before sunrise and looked like a rumor of the day ahead. On the highway, a single truck was visible in the distance, its lights coming down out of the pass, running the long grade into the valley in the early dark. "Because you were asking for help," he said, "and I was there." The truck reached the valley floor and its speed leveled out, and it came up the highway past the restaurant, and the driver's lights were on, and his cab was warm against the cold, and he may or may not have looked at the sign as he passed. He passed the way trucks past at that hour. Steadily. Headed somewhere, the road ahead longer than the road behind. Cameron leaned against Logan's arm, not dramatically, just a small shift of weight and proximity. The kind that didn't mean anything except everything. The mountains turned from gray to the first cold pink of the morning. Inside, the coffee had started.